By late 1944, the skies over Europe had a familiar, violent rhythm. The drone of 1,000-piston engines, the chatter of machine guns, the percussive blast of flak. Allied airmen knew these sounds intimately. But then a new sound appeared, a piercing, futuristic hiss that ripped through the air, unlike anything heard before. It was the sound of revolution. This was the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter. To the Germans who flew it, it was a Schwalbe or Swallow. To the bomber crews it hunted, it was the Sturmvogel, the Stormbird. It represented a quantum leap in aviation technology. With no propellers, it was powered by two Junkers Jumo 004 jet engines slung under its swept-back wings. This radical new propulsion system gave the Me 262 a staggering advantage in speed. It was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the fastest Allied propeller-driven fighter, the P-51 Mustang. Some estimates place the advantage as high as 120 miles per hour. For Allied escort pilots, accustomed to being the kings of the sky, it was a deeply humbling experience. Their Mustangs and Thunderbolts, masters of dogfighting, suddenly felt anchored in the air. The jet could engage or disengage at will. It would appear as a speck in the distance, swell to full size in seconds, and then vanish just as quickly, its cannons tearing the thin skin of a B-17 Flying Fortress. A report from the U.S. 8th Air Force noted the psychological effect. Pilots reported feeling a sense of futility and amazement as the German jets blew past their formations. The rules of air combat had been rewritten overnight. On March 31, 1945, in one of the largest single-jet actions of the war, an estimated 37 Me-262s appeared, intercepting a formation of Royal Air Force bombers and their fighter escorts. It was a terrifying glimpse of what the Luftwaffe could do if it had more of these miracle weapons. Fortunately for the Allies, the Me-262 was a case of too little, too late. Plagued by engine troubles, fuel shortages, and constant attacks on their airfields, the jets were never deployed in numbers sufficient to change the war's outcome. But Allied commanders knew they were looking at the future. The Me-262 wasn't just a threat to be neutralized. It was a priceless piece of technology that had to be captured and understood. The directive came from the very top of the Army Air Forces. The goal was no longer just to shoot down these advanced German aircraft. The new mission was to capture them intact. This task would fall to a small, specialized branch of military intelligence known as Air Technical Intelligence, or ATI. For years, ATI teams had followed frontline troops, picking through the wreckage of enemy planes for clues. Their job was to reverse engineer the enemy's mind, to figure out their manufacturing capabilities, their technological strengths, and, most importantly, their weaknesses. Every captured instrument panel, every fragment of a new wing design, was sent back to Wright Field in Ohio for analysis. But the Me-262 was the ultimate prize. A wrecked jet was useful, but an airworthy one was a Rosetta Stone. Flying would unlock its secrets, revealing performance flaws that Allied pilots could exploit. And so, as the Allied armies pushed into Germany in the spring of 1945, a special operation was born. It was code-named Lusty. Operation Lusty was not a combat mission. It was a technological treasure hunt on a continental scale. Its purpose was to identify, secure, and evacuate the most advanced examples of German aviation technology before they could be destroyed by the retreating German army or fall into the hands of other Allied nations. The list of targets was long, from rocket planes and guided bombs to advanced radars. But at the very top of that list, marked with the highest priority, was the Messerschmitt Me 262. The man chosen to lead this critical intelligence-gathering mission was Colonel Harold E. Watson, a former test pilot from Wright Field. Watson was known for his sharp mind and his dislike of bureaucratic red tape. Watson wasn't just a desk-bound officer. He had flight-tested nearly every aircraft in the U.S. Army Air Force's inventory. He understood what made an airplane tick and, more importantly, what made it fail. He was the perfect man for the job. He began assembling his team. He didn't want staff officers. He needed mechanics, engineers, and, most crucially, pilots. He handpicked a group of flyers from the 5th Fighter Group, all experienced combat veterans and test pilots. They were soon given an unofficial but fitting nickname, Watson's Whizzers. Their assignment was simple in theory, but immensely dangerous in practice. Go into the heart of a collapsing enemy nation and steal its most advanced secrets. The British had a similar objective. Their own teams of technical intelligence experts were fanning out across northern Germany, operating under the Air Ministry. The Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough was just as eager as Wright Field to get their hands on a flyable jet. The race was on. As ground forces captured German airfields, Watson's team would follow right behind them. They had a list of priority sites, airfields where intelligence suggested the Me-262s were based. These included bases at Lechfeld, Melun, and other known jet centers. The hope was to find the aircraft not just intact, but in flyable condition, perhaps hidden away in camouflage shelters or deep in underground factories. The Whizzers traveled light. They flew into newly captured territories in AC-47 Skitran, loaded with tools, technical manuals pieced together from fragments, and a team of German-speaking interrogators. Their greatest challenge was the chaotic environment of a defeated Germany. They had to navigate roving bands of surrendered soldiers, displaced civilians, and the constant threat of booby traps left behind by retreating German forces. And they were working against the clock. Every day that passed increased the risk that a desperate German officer would follow orders to destroy the jets, or that a souvenir-hunting GI would unknowingly strip a vital instrument from a priceless specimen. The first major breakthrough came at a forward operating base. There, the teams found what they were looking for, several Me-262s, seemingly abandoned. But a closer look revealed a major problem. The planes were sabotaged. Instruments were smashed, tires were slashed, and crucial engine components had been removed. The Germans had been thorough in their destruction. This became a recurring pattern. Airfield after airfield yielded graveyards of advanced aircraft, tantalizingly close but ultimately useless. Watson's team realized they couldn't just find the planes. They would have to rebuild them. The search expanded. Watson needed more than just airframes. He needed spare parts, and especially spare Jumo 004 engines. The jet engines were notoriously unreliable, with service life often measured in just a handful of hours. To get a dozen Me-262s into the air, they would need to cannibalize parts from dozens more. The mission evolved from a simple recovery to a massive, open-air assembly operation. The teams also needed knowledge. The American pilots had never flown a jet, let alone one with German-language instruments and famously delicate engines. A careless throttle movement on the Jumo could cause a flameout or, worse, a turbine failure. The solution was as audacious as the mission itself. Alongside the hunt for aircraft, Operation LUSTY began a hunt for people. They needed German test pilots, mechanics, and Messerschmitt engineers who could teach the Whizzers how to fly their own creation. In the chaos of post-war Germany, finding these men would be a challenge. But for Watson's Whizzers, it was just one more obstacle in their race to capture the secrets of the Stormbird before they were lost forever. The scavenger hunt for parts across a shattered Germany was only half the battle. Colonel Watson knew that even with a complete airframe and working engines, the Messerschmitt Me 262 was a dangerous unknown. His American pilots, experts in piston engine combat, were total novices in the world of jet propulsion. To attempt a first flight without expert guidance was to risk not only the pilot's life, but one of the priceless captured aircraft. Watson's team needed the plane's original operators. They began spreading the word through prisoner-of-war camps in newly occupied towns. The Americans were looking for Luftwaffe jet mechanics and pilots, and were offering good food and safety in exchange for cooperation. The real breakthrough happened at the vast Messerschmitt Assembly and Flight Test Center near the town of Lechfeld. As Allied troops secured the sprawling airfield, Watson's Whizzers moved in. It was the mother lode. They found dozens of Me-262s, cleverly dispersed in forested hiding spots around the main field to protect them from air raids. Some were damaged, some were incomplete, but several appear to be perfectly intact. And at Lechfeld, they found their man, Karl Bauer, Messerschmitt's chief of production flight testing. Bauer was, quite simply, one of the most experienced Me-262 pilots in the world. Along with Bauer, the Whizzers rounded up a group of German mechanics and flight crew who had stayed at the base. They were soon hired by the U.S. Army Air Forces. These former enemies, weary of war, were eager to work and fascinated by the Americans' mission. An unusual but effective partnership was formed on the flight line at Lechfeld. American GIs and German mechanics worked side by side, united by a common goal: to bring the jets back to life. Colonel Watson selected the most promising airframes for restoration: 10 single-seat Me-262A fighters, and most importantly, a rare two-seat trainer, the Me-262B. This trainer would be the key to safely checking out the American pilots. The work was a sprawling act of improvisation. The team scoured the field, cannibalizing landing gear from one wreck, a radio from another, and an instrument from a third to create a single airworthy aircraft. With the German ground crews translating the maintenance manuals and pointing out critical details, the Whizzers began to understand the jet's quirks. The Jumo engines, they learned, required a delicate touch. Karl Bauer and his pilots explained that jamming the throttle forward too quickly, a standard reaction in a piston fighter, would flood the combustion chambers with fuel, causing the engines to flame out or even catch fire. Once a few planes were deemed flyable, the training began. In the back seat of the Me-262 trainer, Karl Bauer gave the American pilots their first taste of jet power. One of those pilots was Captain Bob Straubel. For a man used to the violent roar and torque of a propeller plane, the smooth, vibration-free acceleration of the jet was an alien sensation. After his checkout flight with Bauer, it was time for Straubel to solo. The Americans now possessed enough knowledge to attempt what had been unthinkable just weeks earlier: flying the enemy's most advanced fighter on their own. While Watson's team consolidated their finds at Lechfeld, a similar hunt was underway in the British zone of occupation in northern Germany. Royal Air Force intelligence units, like No. 135 Expeditionary Air Wing, were securing German airfields, such as Fassberg, Schleswig, and Lüneburg, discovering their own caches of Me-262s. The British had their own jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor, which had seen limited service near the end of the war. But they knew the Me-262, with its swept wings, was a more advanced design, and they were determined to test it. The task of evaluating these captured jets fell to a special group of pilots from the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, or RA, and at the head of that list was a man who would become a legend in the world of flight testing: Captain Eric Winkle Brown, a small, unassuming Royal Navy pilot with an almost supernatural talent for flying. By the end of his career, he would hold the world record for flying the most types of aircraft, a staggering 487. Brown and his team arrived at the captured airfields and, like the Americans, began the process of identifying flyable Me-262s. Without the benefit of a two-seat trainer, Brown had to rely on captured manuals and his own vast experience. He made his first flight in a Me-262 at Schleswig. Just like the Americans, he was immediately impressed by the absence of vibration and an incredible sense of speed. Back at Lechfeld, Colonel Watson's primary goal was to get his collection of jets out of Germany and back to the United States for systematic evaluation at Wright Field. Driving them out on trucks was too slow and cumbersome. They would have to be flown. The plan was audacious. Watson's Whizzers would personally fly the captured Me-262s on a multi-leg journey across Allied-occupied France to the port city of Cherbourg. The flight was nicknamed the Cherbourg Express. It was a journey fraught with peril. The pilots had only a few hours of experience in the jet. The engines were notoriously fragile, and there were no spare parts along the route. Navigation would also be a challenge. The Me-262 flew so fast that familiar landmarks would pass in a blur. Pilots accustomed to navigating at 300 miles per hour now had to adjust to flying at over 500. And there was another, more immediate danger. The Me-262's silhouette was unmistakable. To every Allied anti-aircraft gunner and patrol pilot along the route, it was the profile of the enemy. To prevent a catastrophic friendly fire incident, the flights would be carefully coordinated. But in the busy, chaotic airspace of post-war Europe, there were no guarantees. The restored jets were painted with high-visibility U.S. Army Air Forces insignia. One of the aircraft, flown by Captain Straubel, was whimsically nicknamed Marge, Another was dubbed Cookie 7. With the planes ready and the pilots briefed, the first leg of the journey was to a forward airfield in France. Escorted by P-51 Mustangs and AB-25 bombers serving as a navigation guide, the strange formation took to the skies. For the American pilots, it was a surreal experience. They were nursing the very aircraft they had been trained to fear, coaxing the unreliable engines and delicate airframes across hundreds of miles of unfamiliar territory. The first flights of the Cherbourg Express were a success. The jets landed safely, their engines sputtering but intact. The first step in bringing the future of aviation to America was complete, but the journey was far from over. Each takeoff and landing was a new gamble with the fragile Jumeau engines, and as the pilots would soon discover, the Stormbird still had a few dangerous surprises in store for its new masters. The Cherbourg Express was a logistical tightrope walk. With each successful landing at a staging field in France, the confidence of Watson's Whizzers grew, but they were acutely aware that they were flying on borrowed time, pushing the fragile German jet engines far beyond their expected service life. The pilots developed a feel for their strange new mounts. They learned to nurse the throttles, to anticipate the slow engine response, and to fly wide, gentle approaches for landing, preserving speed until the last possible moment. Despite the careful planning and the skill of the pilots, the inherent flaws of the Jumeau 004 engine were a constant threat. The turbine blades, made from inferior steel alloys due to wartime shortages, were prone to stretching and failing without warning. The inevitable finally happened during one of the ferry legs. Lieutenant Fred Austin was piloting his Me 262 when one of his engines failed catastrophically. With no hope of reaching the airfield, he was forced to bail out. Austin survived the bailout, but his priceless aircraft was destroyed. It was a stark reminder of the immense risks they were taking. Of the 10 single-seat Me 262s Watson's team had painstakingly restored, one was now gone. The remaining 9 jets, along with the 2-seat trainer, pressed on. The pressure was immense. Each pilot knew that the loss of another aircraft would be a major blow to the entire intelligence-gathering effort. Finally, after several tense days of island hopping between French airfields, the strange fleet of captured jets arrived at their destination, the coastal airfield of Courqueville in Cherbourg. Their arrival caused a sensation. For the thousands of Allied soldiers and sailors at the massive port, it was their first close-up look at the mythical German jet. The once-feared Stormbird was now a captive trophy. The next challenge was getting the aircraft to America. The solution was waiting for them in harbor. The British escort carrier, HMS Reaper. HMS Reaper was built in America and had been loaned to the Royal Navy. In a fitting turn of events, it was now tasked with carrying the crown jewels of German aviation technology back to the United States. Getting the jets onto the carrier's flight deck required careful disassembly. The wings were removed from the fuselages, and each component was meticulously labeled and waterproofed for the long sea voyage. Colonel Watson, ever the hands-on leader, personally supervised the loading. The collection of Me-262s, along with other high-priority German aircraft recovered by Operation LUSTY, were hoisted aboard and secured. With its precious cargo of secrets stowed, HMS Reaper set sail for America. The first, most daring phase of Operation LUSTY was over. Now the scientists and test pilots at Wright Field will begin their work. While the American-bound jets were crossing the Atlantic, the British were conducting their own intensive evaluation. The Me-262 secured by RAF teams had been flown from Germany directly to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Here, Captain Eric Winkle Brown and the other RA test pilots began a systematic program to dissect the Me-262's performance and discover its vulnerabilities. Brown's flights confirmed what Allied pilots already knew. In a straight line and at high altitude, the Me-262 was untouchable. His reports noted its top speed was significantly higher than any propeller aircraft. But Brown was looking for weaknesses. He quickly discovered the jet's Achilles heel, its poor acceleration at low speeds. The Jumeau engine took a long time to spool up and produce full thrust. In a mock dogfight, a piston engine fighter like a Spitfire or a Mustang could out-accelerate the Me-262 from a low-speed starting point. This confirmed field reports from Allied pilots who had successfully bounced jets during their takeoff or landing phases. The RA tests also explored the Me-262's handling. Brown found the controls to be effective, but the aircraft was sluggish in a roll compared to fighters like the Focke-Wulf 190. Another critical discovery was made during high-speed dives. Like many early high-speed aircraft, the Me-262 suffered from compressibility. At speeds approaching Mach 0.86, the airflow over the wings would become turbulent, causing severe nose-down pitch that could be impossible to recover from. For an Allied pilot chasing a diving Me-262, this meant the German jet had a very real do-not-exceed speed. If the German pilot pushed his dive too far, the plane could fly itself into the ground. Inside the cockpit, Brown noted the excellent view afforded by the bubble canopy, but found the gun sight primitive compared to the advanced Euro sights used by the Allies. The RA's official report was a sober, clinical assessment of the revolutionary fighter. It was a weapon of incredible potential, hobbled by rushed development and unreliable engines. The British test program provided the first truly scientific data on how to fight the jet. Don't try to chase it in a straight line. Attack it near its airfield. And if it dives away, be wary of following it too steeply. These lessons, learned in the skies over southern England, would soon be combined with the findings from America. As HMS Reaper steamed towards the East Coast, the largest collection of captured German jets was about to meet the full might of American industrial and scientific analysis. The secrets of the Stormbird were slowly being unlocked, and waiting for them, in a quiet corner of Indiana, was a top-secret airfield built for this exact purpose. A place where the Me-262 would be flown, fought, and completely understood. In late July 1945, HMS Reaper steamed into Newark, New Jersey. On its flight deck, lashed against the salt spray, sat the future of aviation. The disassembled fuselages and wings of the captured Messerschmitts represented the final spoils of a long and costly war. Colonel Watson and his team had succeeded. The Cherbourg Express had delivered its precious cargo. Now, the Me-262s and other advanced German aircraft were carefully offloaded and prepared for the next leg of their journey. Their destination was the nerve center of the Army Air Force's technical prowess, Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. The aircraft were loaded onto trucks and transported overland, a strange convoy carrying enemy secrets through the American heartland. At Wright Field, the Air Technical Service Command began the painstaking process of reassembly. The same German mechanics who had helped restore the jets at Lechfeld were flown to the U.S. to assist, their expertise still considered essential. The reassembled jets were a source of intense fascination. Engineers and designers from America's top aviation companies flocked to Wright Field to see the swept-wing fighter up close. It was a tangible piece of the future, and it had been built by the enemy. But Wright Field, a bustling hub of activity, was not the ideal place for kind of extensive and potentially dangerous flight testing the Me-262 required. The Army Air Forces needed a location that was secure, remote, and purpose-built for wringing the secrets out of captured aircraft. They had just the place. Tucked away in the quiet farmland near Seymour, Indiana, was Freeman Army Airfield. Originally a twin-engine pilot training base, Freeman Field had recently been designated as the Foreign Aircraft Evaluation Center for the Army Air Forces. Its mission was simple: to test and evaluate every significant piece of enemy aviation technology. The base was equipped with specialist teams, extensive workshops, and, most importantly, a high level of security. It was America's secret airfield. In August of 1945, the war in the Pacific ended. The urgency of developing counter-tactics was gone, but the technological race was only just beginning. The focus of the Me-262 evaluation shifted from winning the war to shaping the peace. The first Me-262s were flown from Wright Field to their new home in Indiana. For the first time, the futuristic hiss of the Jumo jet engines was heard over American soil, a sound that announced the dawn of a new age for the nation's air forces. At Freeman Field, the testing program was far more comprehensive than the improvised flights in Europe. This was a full-scale scientific dissection of a weapon system. One of the most valuable assets was the two-seat Me-262B trainer. The Americans gave it the number FE-610, and it was affectionately nicknamed Vera. It became the primary tool for safely qualifying American test pilots on the exotic jet. The core of the program at Freeman Field was comparison. The question was no longer just how good is the Me-262, but how good is it compared to our best? Mock combat trials were arranged. The Me-262s were pitted against America's premier piston-engine fighters, the P-51 Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt. They also flew against America's own first-generation jet, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. The results of these fly-offs were illuminating. Against the piston fighters, the outcome was exactly as expected. If the Me-262 pilot used his speed advantage, he was untouchable. The Mustang and Thunderbolt couldn't catch it, couldn't climb with it, and couldn't follow in a dive. However, the American pilots quickly confirmed the weaknesses Winkle Brown's team had found. If the Me-262 pilot was foolish enough to get into a low-speed, turning dogfight, the superior maneuverability of the piston-engine fighters could win the day. The matchup against the P-80 Shooting Star was the most important. This was America's jet versus Germany's jet. The P-80, with its single, more reliable centrifugal flow engine and straight wings, was a very different design. These trials gave American designers invaluable data. The Me-262 swept wings, a feature Messerschmitt had added partly by chance to solve a center of gravity issue, were found to be incredibly effective at delaying the effects of high-speed compressibility. This was a lesson that would directly influence the next generation of American fighters. But the flying at Freeman Field was not without risk. The Jumo engines were just as unreliable over Indiana as they had been over Germany. Captain Bob Straubel, one of the original Whizzers, experienced this firsthand. During one flight, an engine failed just after takeoff. Then, as he circled to land, his landing gear refused to come down. With only one engine and no landing gear, Straubel was forced to make a skillful gear-up belly landing, sliding the priceless jet down the runway on a bed of foam laid down by the fire crews. The aircraft was damaged, but Straubel's expert handling had saved it from being destroyed. The incident underscored the courage of the test pilots, who were flying improving aircraft with known, fatal flaws, all in the name of science. Beyond flight testing, the aircraft were subjected to total technical evaluation. Planes were disassembled piece by piece. Metallurgists analyzed the composition of the turbine blades. Engineers studied the construction of the airframe, looking for manufacturing shortcuts and design innovations. By 1946, the mission at Freeman Field was largely complete. The Army Air Forces had learned what it needed to know. The strengths of the Me-262, its speed and swept wings, were being incorporated into new American designs. Its weaknesses, unreliable engines and poor acceleration, were being studied to be avoided. The valuable collection of enemy aircraft was moved one last time. Freeman Field was scheduled to be closed, and the remaining flyable jets were sent to Wright Field for continued testing, while others were transferred to Naval Air Station Patuxent River for evaluation by the Navy. The era of clandestine evaluation was over. The combined findings from the British RA and the American programs at Wright and Freeman Fields had created a complete, three-dimensional picture of the world's first jet fighter. This knowledge was distilled into tactical doctrine, official reports, and engineering manuals. It was a comprehensive guide on how to fly the Me-262, how to fight it, and, most importantly, how to build something better. The pilots of the 8th Air Force had developed their own desperate, field-expedient tactics for dealing with the jets during the war. They orbited the jet bases, ambushing them as they took off and landed. They used their superior numbers to bracket and trap the faster planes. Now, those raw, combat-born lessons were validated and refined by the scientific data from Farnborough and Freeman Field. The test pilots had confirmed that the most vulnerable moments in the Me-262's flight were takeoff and landing, when its acceleration was poor and the pilot was preoccupied. They proved that forcing a jet into a turning fight was a winning strategy for a piston-engine fighter. They quantified the exact speed at which the jet's dive became uncontrollable. The mystery of the Stormbird was gone, replaced by a cold, hard set of performance figures and tactical instructions. Operation LUSTY, and the exhaustive testing that followed had provided the Western Allies with an invaluable shortcut into the jet age. It was a bridge built from the wreckage of the Third Reich, leading directly to the next generation of air power. The end of the testing programs at Freeman Field and Farnborough marked a turning point. The Me-262 was no longer an enemy weapon to be feared or a secret to be unlocked. It was now a museum piece, a historical artifact, and a data set. The knowledge gleaned from its wings, engines, and combat performance had been absorbed into the DNA of Western air power. The tactical lessons learned in the skies over Europe and proven in controlled tests over England and America had been codified. So, what were the definitive tactics for countering the Stormbird? The final doctrine, compiled from pilot reports and test data, was clear and logical. It focused entirely on exploiting the jet's weaknesses rather than challenging its strengths. First and foremost was the airfield ambush. Test pilots on both sides of the Atlantic confirmed that the Me-262 was at its most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. With its slow acceleration and the pilot focus on managing the delicate engines, the jet was a sitting duck. Allied fighter groups had already improvised this tactic during the war, establishing rat patrols over known jet bases. The post-war analysis proved this was, without a doubt, the most effective and safest way for a propeller fighter to secure a kill against a jet. The second tactic was to exploit the turn. If caught in open combat, an Allied pilot was instructed never to follow a jet in a climb or a dive. The only chance was to force the Me-22 into a horizontal, turning dogfight. The test flights had provided the hard numbers. The Me-262's roll rate was slower than Allied fighters, and at lower speeds, a P-51 or Spitfire could easily outturn it. The key was to survive the initial high-speed pass, and then draw the German pilot into a fight he couldn't win. Finally, there was a high-speed dive. The discovery of the Me-262's compressibility issues was critical. An Allied pilot pursuing a diving jet was taught to hold back slightly, pacing the enemy. The hope was that the German pilot, desperate to escape, would push his aircraft past its critical Mach number, losing control. The ultimate counter to Me-262, however, was not a tactic, but technology. The lessons learned from its swept wings were soon visible in a new generation of Western aircraft. The American F-86 Sabre and the Soviet MiG-15, which would soon clash in the skies over Korea, both owed a clear design lineage to the German jet. Operation LUSTY had succeeded beyond all expectations. It was a mission born of necessity, executed with daring, and its results shaped the course of military aviation for decades. But what became of the aircraft themselves? The priceless collection of Stormbirds, so painstakingly recovered and tested? Their fates were varied. In the late 1940s, with budgets shrinking and new American jets rolling off the assembly lines, the captured aircraft became surplus. Many of the aircraft evaluated at Freeman Field, including some of the Me-262s, were sadly declared obsolete. It is reported that they were simply buried in pits at the edge of the airfield to make way for new projects. For years, their exact location was the stuff of local legend. The British tested Me-262s met a similar fate. After being thoroughly evaluated by the RA, most were eventually scrapped. Only one, an aircraft designated Yellow 7, was preserved for its historical significance. It remains on display at the Royal Air Force Museum, Cosford. A handful of the American-held jets were saved from the scrap heap or the burial pit. They were earmarked for the nascent National Air Museum that would one day become the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. One of the most famous survivors is the Me-262A with the factory number 500071. It was one of the original jets restored at Lechfeld and flown on the Cherbourg Express. Today, it stands proudly at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, just a short distance from where it was first tested in America. And what of Vera, the two-seat trainer that taught America's test pilots how to fly a jet? After its service at Freeman Field, it was passed to the Navy for further evaluation. Eventually, it was acquired by a private owner. After a long and complex history, Vera was meticulously restored back to flying condition. Today, it is one of the only original, flyable Me-262s in the world, a living testament to the German engineers who built it and the Allied airmen who risked their lives to capture and fly it. The story of the captured Me-262s is more than just a tale of a remarkable airplane. It's a story about the critical role of technical intelligence in modern warfare. It's a story of courage, the courage of men like Colonel Watson, Bob Straubel, and Winkle Brown, who flew unfamiliar and dangerous machines to secure a technological edge. And ultimately, it's a story about the dawn of a new age. The appearance of the Stormbird over Europe was a terrifying glimpse of the future of war. But the Allied effort to capture, understand, and master its technology ensured that the West would not be left behind in the jet age that followed. The treasure hunt of Operation LUSTY gave the Allies more than just a collection of exotic aircraft. It gave them knowledge. And in the Cold War that was to come, that knowledge would prove to be more valuable than any weapon.